Hello everyone, this is Gene. I'm back with another video. No camera today because I spent all morning sitting in front of a camera and I don't feel like putting my tired face on a screen today. I am tired, I am slightly grumpy, and I just had lunch, which includes a Mike's Hard Lemonade. So I might come across a bit more grumpy than usual. But I wanted to make a brief video, and there's so many things I want to make videos about, things both stupid and serious, but I only have but so much mental space and time for about one thing at a time. But I hope everybody is well this Sunday afternoon. It's about 2:45, 2:47, something. In the afternoon here in New York, here in Queens, or at least my little part of Queens, my little part of the world. But I wanted to briefly cover a particular paragraph in this longer article about a TV show named Bluey, because it deals with representation and I guess the arguments for representation. And I just wanted to just briefly touch upon that. Now, I've read this whole article. I'm not covering the whole thing because there's only one particular part I want to focus in on. But naturally, it will be linked in the description and you can review the whole thing on your own if you so wish. So, the lady here is Beverley Wang, right? It says here that she's a journalist, podcast host, pop culture lover, and parent out to find what we can learn from pop culture. Right, now this article is about her love of the TV show Bluey, right, which is fine. I have no issue with her liking a children's show. I think that, the testament of a good TV show, of a good quote-unquote children's show, is if it can touch the hearts of an adult, because children are very open. They don't have a lot of life experience typically, so their imaginations, their emotions, their hearts are a lot more open. Whereas an adult, because you're older, you've been through a lot, you've experienced things, right? You're just by nature, right? You lose your innocence and your heart hardens and all that. So if something that's made for kids can still touch you when you're well into your adulthood, right? And you're not singing the I guess say verse, live and let die, right? You were young and your heart was an open book, right? Right, right. If you're not saying that, if you're not saying live and let die, right? And as an adult, when you're watching a children's show, I think it's proof that the show is of good quality, right? So she spent about the first two headings or so talking about her love of the show and how it touches her heart and how it touches upon, serious topics like growing up and death and, different things that kids are going to have to face eventually, which is par of the course for a lot of kids shows. So you might be wondering, Gene, what's the big deal with this article then? Well, here's the big deal. Here's the big deal. This section, right here. My Bluey struggle. Representation. I'm very glad she put the word Bluey in the middle, because if you take that out, it sounds like she's quoting the title of a certain book that was written by a certain leader of Germany during the 30s and 40s who, ended up killing millions upon millions of people, principally of a certain religious group. So yeah, I'm very glad that she put the word Bluey in the middle of that, right? But especially if you've never heard of this show like I haven't, let's look briefly at what Bluey is supposed to be. Right, so it says here on Wikipedia, Bluey is a 2018 TV series, right? It's an Australian animated television series for preschool children that premiered on ABC Kids on October 1st, 2018. It was created by Joe Broom, right? It was created by Joe Broom with Queensland production group Ludo Studio. It was commissioned by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation with the British Broadcasting Corporation with BBC Studios holding global distribution and merchandising rights. The series made its premiere on Disney Junior in the US and was released internationally on Disney+. The show follows Bluey, an anthropomorphic 6-year-old blue heeler puppy who is characterized by her abundance of energy, imagination, and curiosity of the world, right? So, a child, right? Very general depiction of an innocent child. The young dog lives with her father, Bandit, mother, Chili, and younger sister, Bingo, who regularly joins Bluey on adventures as the pair embark on imaginative play together. Other characters featured each represent a different dog breed. Overarching themes include the focus on family, growing up, and Australian culture. The program was created and produced in Queensland. Its capital city inspires the show's setting. And it says that it's received high viewership in Australia, right? And that it's won different types of awards, and that it's a good representation for modern family life, constructive parenting, Bandit being a positive father figure, minor shortcomings in regards to language, and that it was renewed for a third series, or a third season, I guess, in the U.S. in October of 2020. Okay, so seems like it's a pretty popular show in Australia. So let's see what her struggle is when it comes to the representation of a show starring a little dog, a puppy dog. Because let's be honest, she can't be a real 6-year-old dog, because a dog at 6 years old is considered a grown adult dog. If this were in any way based in reality, she would probably be a few months old as a puppy. But anyway, it says here, my Bluey struggle, representation. I understand that for the most part, Bluey's creators don't view their show through a political lens. I'm aware this may come across as asking too much of a show that's already so tender, nuanced, and joyful. But it's exactly because Bluey has demonstrated depth and range that I can't help asking anyway. My question is, can Bluey be more representative? Lady, representative of what? Representative of what? What do you mean by this? What is it lacking? And yes, I'm aware that Bluey's border collie pal Mackenzie is from New Zealand. As a parent of color, I am always conscious of the presence or absence of diverse representation in kids' pop culture. So am I. I'm not a parent, but I've always been aware of diversity in media. I grew up in a very, I grew up in a media, in a youth culture that was very diverse. It's called the 1990s, where we had various cartoons ranging from Conan to Biker Mice from Mars to we had shows like Power Rangers, which came from Japan, was originally called Super Sentai, and then got adapted for America. Then we had Gargoyles and Batman and Spider-Man and all different types of shows. Carmen Sandiego, Cyber 6 on the weekends. So yeah, I grew up with a lot of representation in kids' media. So what's your argument here, lady? Right? What that means for children and the other conversations we have around that. I sincerely believe you don't have to be other to think about this too. I would agree with you. I'm just not sure I agree with your argument. We live in a world where the majority of main characters on children's television are white. Well, you do live in Australia. I would imagine Australia is still a white majority nation. But okay. Where there are more animals than people of color protagonists populating the pages of children's books. Maybe it's because children like bright colors. You know, Clifford the big red dog, right? Or a character, but not a dog, such as Garfield, who is orange. Maybe it's easier to create, a over-the-top representation of a dog and color him red. It's easier to imagine that as a child than to take a literal human and make them red, because that would be considered offensive to Native Americans and possibly Aboriginals in Australia. I don't know. So maybe that's why, animals are used, because they don't look human, and you will probably not run into these type of issues so much. Right? Says, where are the disabled, queer, poor, gender diverse dogs of color? Okay, if you want disabled dogs, again, I don't know the show, but that might be an interesting addition, because there are dogs out there, there are animals who are disabled. Either they're born and they have a certain neurological issue, or they get hurt, or they're abused. So yeah, I think that if it works for the show, I don't think it'd be bad in of itself to add a disabled animal character if it works for the story. But my dear, if you're looking for disabled characters in kids media or in children's media, you could always look at superheroes. Plenty of superheroes are disabled. Professor X can't walk. Daredevil is blind, right? And many, many, many others, right? Wolverine can't die. For him, that's a disability. So yeah, that'd be interesting. Queer. Okay. Not too many animals in the wild engage in same-sex relations. I know some do, but the ones that I know that have are typically in captivity, right? But even if that were the case, I'm not sure that we need overt queer representation in children's media like this, and I'll explain why. Because people are not comfortable talking about even heterosexual sexuality to children. I'm certain many parents have had their kids ask, Mom, Dad, where do babies come from? And what do parents usually do? They usually say, a stork, right? Or they give some, technically correct non-committal answer like, oh, when you were a baby, you were in mommy's tummy for several months, right? They don't want to explain heterosexuality and and heterosexual sexual relations to 4-year-olds. And given that many people, even in our increasingly secular world, are religious and not just Christian, there are Jews, there are Muslims, there are people of other faiths who may not necessarily be happy with the idea of a children's show touching upon such a complex topic as sexuality. I would imagine that there are probably even LGBTQ people who feel that introducing sexuality of any sort in a children's show is probably just a bit too young, right? Just let them let them be innocent for a little while longer. Okay, and they say now poor. Well, again, that would be interesting. It would depend on how they did that, right? I'm not against the idea, but I think it would depend on how this worked in the show's overall world. Gender diverse. Um, what what does that mean? We're talking about dogs. First of all, again, I think it's a topic way too complex and way too much of a divisive hot button issue to be introducing in a kids show. But we're talking about dogs. Dogs. Dogs come in two genders, male and female. That's literally it. Moving on. Dogs of color and single parent dog families. Okay, let's focus on dogs of color. I actually think dogs of color, and by this we all know she means coded to represent real world ethnicities or nationalities, right? Because most dogs already are various colors, right? They have fur and they have patterns and color in their fur, right? I think that would be interesting. But the problem is, I think if you were to actually try doing that, you would get in trouble. Because, for example, let's say you have a German Shepherd, and since it's a German Shepherd, right, you code it to be German-like, right? You give it a German accent, and whatnot, right? So what happens? People are going to get upset, especially in today's world, because they're going to say that the show is being pro cop or anti this social movement or whatever because of the fact that German Shepherds are often used for police dogs. They're often police dogs, right? So that one's off the table, right? Let's say you coded a pit bull, right? I'm gonna naturally I'm from this is from an American's perspective, so I don't know how what the stereotypes of say Black Australians are, but here in America, right, one of the enduring stereotypes of Black Americans in particular, um, inner city Black Americans, right, is being kind of like a thug, right, the bandana and always mean mugging and looking hard and sagging your pants, and especially back in the 1990s, owning a pit bull dog. So what if you had a pit bull who was sort of coded to be this like rough around the edges type of black character? Well, then you'd be called racist for playing into the stereotype about black people, especially black people in the hood, owning a pit bull, right? Or let's say you introduced an Akita, right? And let's say you gave the Akita a Japanese accent and you named it Hachiko, right? Then you would be accused of being stereotypical towards Asians, in particular toward the Japanese, despite the fact that Akita's literally originated in Japan and there really is a dog. Famous story, I think most people, if not everyone, knows it, of the dog Hachiko, who is beloved in Japan, has a literal statue at a train station in his honor. I think he has two now, right? Who was noted for his love and loyalty toward his master, right? But if you were to say have the dog and he speaks with a Japanese accent, he kind of like wears samurai armor or whatever, right? And his name is Hachiko, right? And he's like loyal, like excessively loyal to his master, right? That would be considered, an offensive stereotype, right? You're stereotyping Japanese people, and you're being offensive. So I like the idea. I'm just not sure how in the world that would work in not just modern day America per se, but modern day Australia. Right? People are so damn sensitive to these type of things. No one knows how to loosen up. And everything is looked at, especially when it comes to race. It's looked at and considered with this incredibly critical eye. So I'm not quite sure how, realistically speaking, you could introduce dogs of color. And as for single parent dog families, well, okay, that would actually make sense. And maybe, there's a sickly dog and mama dog or papa dog, and one of them passes away and now the other dog's got to carry on and raise the puppies. That would actually be interesting. Right? And then it says here, if they're in the background, let them come forward and whatnot, right? So this was the part that I really wanted to focus on. But here's the thing. Representation. Here's what frustrates me about this demand for representation, right? She says herself, right? The show's already tender, nuanced, joyful, but can it be more representative? And again, I do think certain ideas, a disabled dog, maybe dealing with the death of a parent dog, right, are interesting ideas. Maybe a poor dog, if you can do that, if it makes sense in story, I think those would be interesting topics to cover. Because that does happen in children's lives, right? Someone gets hurt, someone dies, right? You go from having a nice house to living in a bug-filled apartment. Those things do happen. So I'm not against those plot points or those themes or ideas, but it's this idea of demanding more representation. Can it be more representative? It's like, honey, what do you want? Because especially in the modern day, these demands for more representation. This is a show about a little puppy dog who has the mind of a 6-year-old child. Like, shouldn't you be focusing more on the themes of the show as opposed to whether or not it has a disabled dog or a poor dog or a dog that comes from a single parent home? Shouldn't you be focusing more on the lessons, on the morals, I guess, right? Morals don't necessarily have to be a religious thing, but shouldn't you be focusing more on that and how the show impacts you and your child? She says she's a parent of color, right? So shouldn't that be the focus instead of what the show supposedly lacks? And again, it's only up to its 3rd season. It might actually introduce some of these ideas later on. You don't know. It's not over yet. But When I was reading this, I was thinking about a lot of the cartoons, and I mentioned them earlier, that I grew up watching and still go back to on occasion. And I found myself thinking about how I think this sort of arbitrary faux representation would have ruined certain moments. Now, there are many moments I could focus on, but I want to focus on one in particular. And I think it's from an episode of Justice League, and it involved Batman, right? To make a long story short, there's an episode of a very powerful but very scared young girl, and she's dying, right? But her powers, because she can like warp reality and all that, are dangerous. So towards the end of the episode, Amanda Waller comes up with this device or whatever that can kill her. And she's going to the Justice League and trying to figure out which one of them, basically has it in them to kill a child, right? And eventually Batman walks up and he says, that he'll do it. He takes the device and he literally walks into this like fantasy sort of like forest that this girl has created. And when he gets there, the girl, because she can read his mind, she says to him, I know you aren't going to kill me. And Bruce is like, yeah, I'm not going to. Right, so the way it ends, it's hard for me to talk about it because I always get emotional. But the way it ends is that the girl admits, well, rather the girl asks Bruce, I forget her name, unfortunately, I don't remember her name, but she asks Bruce if she's dying. Or rather, she tells him, because she can read his mind, that she knows that she's dying. And Bruce, admits, he's like, yeah, you are, I'm sorry. And in the end, she's sitting on a swing set, and of all the things she could ask of Batman, of Bruce Wayne in that moment, all she asks of him is to stay with her. To stay with her in her final moments. Because for all of her power, for all of the devastation she can create, in the end, she's a little girl who's dying, and she's terrified of the unknown. I mean, like, y'all can't see me, but like, I'm like really like tearing up. I'm really tearing up just recalling this. So Bruce, again, in his Batman getup, sits he sits on the swing set she created, right? And she just asks him, and it's like, will you stay with me? And he just gives this solemn, yes, right? And he holds her hand, right? And it really touches upon the fact that at that moment, he's not Batman, right? He's not the superhero. He's not the guy who beats up criminals at night. He's Bruce Wayne. He's an 8-year-old boy who lost his parents, who had to sit there with their bodies and just be scared just like this girl was, not knowing what was going to happen next. And in that moment, because he stayed with her until she passed away, because the next time you see him, he's carrying her body out in very, very, La Pieta type style. But he gave to that girl, he gave that girl in her final moments a measure of comfort, right, that he didn't have when the worst moment in his life happened, when he was only 8 years old, right? And that sticks with me. And Justice League has been off TV for probably, what, about 15 years or so, or whatever, but then has stuck with me for all that time, because it's proof of compassion, right? That was one of Bruce's most powerful moments, right? He didn't solve the issue with violence. He solved the issue with compassion and care, with reaching out to another person and being with her in her scariest, and in this case, her final moments. What she needed at that moment was a friend. Not someone who was going to use her like Cadmus and other people had done. Just someone who could at least in some way understand her and be by her side at the very end. And that was Bruce. And I found myself thinking as I was reading this article and recalling this Justice League moment and thinking, my God, what if this type of mindset, right, of pushing diversity over everything, because apparently ABC, the American ABC, right, run by Disney, has admitted, and I saw the Clownfish video on it, they admitted that they have chosen diversity, faux diversity, in my opinion, to the point where they're overlooking what they consider to be good scripts because they're not diverse enough, right? Absolutely asinine, in my opinion. But I found myself thinking and wondering, what if this scene, what if this situation had been developed under this current mindset of diversity overall, and they put, say, like Jon Stewart, right, in that situation. Now, Jon Stewart's a great character on Justice League. He's a wonderful character. He's got a great arc, a great stories. You know, his whole love affair with Hawk Girl and all that. But I don't think that he would have fit in that situation. I think the only person you could use in that particular situation with that girl is Bruce, because of the pain he went through as a child. And I was just thinking, what if this type of mindset had existed back then in the late 90s and early 2000s when the show was out, and they said, "Hey, we can't have Bruce Wayne be the hero of the story in this episode because he's a rich white guy, and we can't come across in any way as promoting that. So let's put the Black Green Lantern." Right? That would be, in my opinion, just so insulting and so reductive to swap one character for another because one of them happens to be a rich white man. Now, fortunately, I don't. I think they chose Bruce. To my knowledge, they chose Bruce to be the character to talk to that girl and stay with her in that scene because he's the one who, in that instance, makes the most sense. And I'm not saying that there were never ever any considerations about race or whatnot back in the 90s and the 2000s with cartoons. Of course there were, but I don't believe it was to this degree. And again, I'm not against some of the general ideas that Miss Wang puts forth, but at the same time, I can't help but wonder why diversity must be more important. First of all, you cannot represent everything. It's impossible. You're always going to lack something. I mean, this is Australia, for example. Where's the representation for the Aboriginals, right? You can't include everything. It's impossible. But instead of focusing on what she believes this show supposedly lacks, why not focus on what she said, what its strengths are, what she herself said was the beauty of it, right? Which is, let me see here. It's up here, right? Does Bluey make you cry? I'm trying to find it. Right, so let me see here. So it says here, you know, Bluey is the award-winning mega hit animated series, right, and all that. And let me see here. Oh, she says it here. I should have just stayed here, right? She says that it's tender, nuanced, and joyful. So why not focus on the show being tender, nuanced, and joyful? Why not focus on the positives of the show instead of pointing out the what it supposedly lacks from her point of view? Maybe it's a bit hypocritical for me to say that, being that the majority of my content is critical and I'm usually venting or ranting about something I dislike. But in this particular case, I think it might help her better to focus on the positive things about this show instead of the negative ones. Because again, some of the things that she wants to put forth, like gender diversity and queer representation in a show for 6-year-olds, I think is pushing it a bit. And again, the whole dogs of color thing, right? Like, again, in today's world, I think that would just get you into a world of trouble. So I'm not quite sure if she could get everything that she wants. I'm not even quite sure if everything she wants is necessarily appropriate for this show. But anyway, that's the video. Please let me know what you think, and I will see you all on the next one. Have a good day or night wherever you are.